discourse as part of a series exposing discrepancies between notions that we supposedly inherited from earlier ages and that we reconstruct in the modern context against the background of peculiarly modern prejudices. The notion that we're here to address, to examine, to explore, to investigate is that of, well, so-called reincarnation. Metempsychosis is the Greek, shall we say, the passage of psyche, of spirit, of soul. All right. But let us bracket this and consider the usual reference that the discourse of or on reincarnation has. That is to Buddhism. Now, so-called Buddhism, or the lesson or the teaching of Buddha. Now, the Buddhist discourse will refer to the Sanskrit samsara. The Chinese will have lunghui, which is again a translation of samsara, and that refers to, we could say, the transmigration of soul. What does this mean, however? Now, if there were any ambiguities or strange aspects to the question of samsara in pre-Buddhist Sanskrit discourse, these ambiguities, these dark areas or gray areas are dispelled by the early teachings of Buddha. There is samsara, and the whole point of the teaching of Buddha is to come out of this mirage of samsara. So samsara is a mirage. It is not ultimately real. Is there such a thing as reincarnation? Well, let us consider now what we mean today by reincarnation. It turns out that what we mean, what those appealing to reincarnation mean, is very much tainted by a modern notion of individuality or of soul. A modern / Cartesian / also Machiavellian if we dig harder. But let us stick to Descartes, René Descartes. René Descartes sees the self as a soul. The soul is also called res cogitans, is not material at all. It confronts the material, although it is filled with the material in terms of the contents of the imagination. It is a merely formal, symbolic entity, an abstract entity, the self. Where is it? Is it here, left, in the ear? Well, some will then speculate, well, it's in the pineal gland, the early moderns. Be that as it may, it is not in space and time as we are used to saying. So it nevertheless interacts with the world. How is this interaction going to happen if it's not in time and space? And so we have all sorts of debates in the early modern world concerning this problem. Now, let us bracket this again. Let us return to the notion of reincarnation. Reincarnation, the notion, the very term reincarnation in the modern context, is conceived against the backdrop of the Cartesian notion of self. So we have me, myself, and I, spiritual being, and I come into the body, and then I come out of it, and then I go back in another body. Right. And so we explore this cycle of reincarnation. And again, in modern reincarnation discourse, it is all fine. We tend to advance through stages and we rise to higher levels of spiritual attainment and better incarnations, as it were. We might say, well, we can reincarnate as in the body of a dog, right? And then we can move on and reincarnate as these souls, these monads, we could say in Leibniz's terms. We can come into the temporal flow and then step out and back in, and then finally what? What's the whole point? Well, in some cases, there is a rejection of the so what. We just keep going, and then when we reach the highest stages of spiritual development, then we keep reincarnating freely without compulsion as beings who will help others rise in turn to the highest peaks of development. It's somewhat of a closed system, an immanent system. It does not require the notion of transcendent and absolutely transcendent mind. We're in this hierarchy of spirits, shall we say, and of incarnations. We need to go through a whole ladder temporal of reincarnations before we can come out of it. And even if we do come out of it, out of this flow, out of this cycle of rebirth, we're still very much enmeshed in it. And in any case, the path is so long that we might as well work on our advancement here without rush. Right? We can. We're all tied to the cycle in very much ineluctable terms. And from here we have tied to the notion and acceptance of the notion of historicism. So we're all historically relative and positioned, situated, so that even our thought, of course, is relative to our condition. The direct link to absolute transcendence is, well, for the most part, obscured with this discourse. Now, let us consider, on the other hand, the classical notion of samsara, lunkhui. Samsara is, as the teachings of Buddha expose it, is a delusion, is an illusion. Is there a way out of this illusion? And, well, that's the whole point of Buddha. There is an awakening. There is the term that was popular in the 60s was a Japanese translation, satori. So there is an awakening, an enlightenment. I mean, that's the whole point of Buddha. Buddha, as a term, refers to awakening, to the light of awakening of mind. So there is this awakening which cuts through the cycle of indebtedness, of karma. Again, karma is, we could say, intended action, moral action, which has repercussions. There's a web of actions, and all of this is dispelled. So the lesson of Buddha and the path of Buddha is that of cutting through, across this cycle of indebtedness, of relativity. I am situated, I am all relative, and my thoughts are indebted to those of others. All of this is a web of illusion. Right? So the notion of Mara in Sanskrit is pertinent. Where does this leave us with reincarnation? Things get worse for our modern brethren. For Buddha speaks of anatta, anatma, no self, muga in Japanese, uo in Chinese. No self, absence of self. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that there is no self in an essential sense, which is to say that there's no such thing as a self. No, it just means that it's not to be found as a determined something that you can point to. So, it is not a name, it is not a something, it is not a body, it is not an abstraction, a concept. The identity that is my identity, for example, is not to be found in any determination, whether it's nominal or physical, conceptual. So where is it? It is absolutely indefinite. Why? Because it is citta, because it is mind. It is thought itself. Mind. Nous, say the Greeks. Thought or mind is what I ultimately am, what this I ultimately is. And thought is absolutely transcendent with respect to its determinations, even though these determinations are determinations of mind, of thought. So in itself, thought is absolutely transcendent. So the Buddha's lesson is reminding us, is calling us back to, inviting us to return to turn to the absolute transcendence of mind, of thought, right? Sometimes called consciousness today. Now, let us consider in parallel Plato's lesson. Plato has stories about the soul that leaves the body, that migrates into the underworld, and then returns. Now, how are we to understand these stories, and can these stories help us understand or approach the Buddhist discourse, which is none other than an interpretation of pre-Buddhist Sanskrit discourse? In Buddha, we have the awakened one. Right? What do we have in Plato? Well, in Plato we have the philosopher. One could say that we have the bodhisattva, who is the student of the wise Buddha, the mind, the image of mind. So in Plato that would be the philosopher, but let us say that we have in Plato a soul, and this is in his mythoi, in his stories, right? Story of air and so forth. But anyway, we have the soul that departs from the body. Right? Still, is it tied to the body? Well, it comes out of it. So there is no link to time and space now. We're in the realm of, well, this kind of dream. The story is a kind of dream. So we envision this. What do we say about this soul? It comes out of the body. It faces divine transcendence. Then it exposes itself to forgetfulness. Depending on how it lived earlier, it will forget more or less. But then it comes back, and it will have background sense of what it had seen the realm of the ideas, of things themselves, of the light. Of things in the light of what? Of the sun in the Republic we hear. So in the light of mind, really, in the light of that which makes things intelligible. So things are fundamentally intelligible, which is to say they are in mind. Otherwise they wouldn't be intelligible. How can things be intelligible? They're intelligible to a mind, right? They're fundamentally intelligible prior to our thinking of them. We can think of things because they're fundamentally in mind. So the whole Platonic tradition will bring this out in discourse, re-articulate it, and say, look, there is a divine mind in which all of these, the whole universe as it is, not as it appears to us, is disclosed, and thanks to this mind, we can begin to understand things. We cannot even begin to understand things if things were not already understood fully in the divine mind. So, the soul returns. And now we ask, what's the whole point of the story? Why does Plato bother? How does this story relate furthermore to that of the cave? Even more famous story of the mythos of the cave. We're here in this world as in a cave. We see the shadows of things, not things themselves. We would need to turn radically to return to things themselves. And as we turn, we see that the appearance of things are linguistically mediated. They are shadows of creations of poets. So the physical world is an illusion on Plato's account. What is more real is that which makes that illusion possible, namely the logos of, or the logoi, the discourses of poets. So language makes it possible for us to dream, right? To dream about shadows, which are abstractions with respect to things themselves. We live in a world of abstractions. When we say, here's a bottle, here's a table, here's a head, these are abstractions. They're abstracted from a purveyor. They're abstracted in the respect that they're defined by names. Right? So how do we escape this world of abstractions, of physical abstractions? Well, we'd have to return to the model, the paradigm that allows us to speak. Right? The foundation of poetry, which is in traditional Greek physis, or nature, right? Nature is the realm of nature of things themselves, is the original world. Now, how does this relate to the problem of metempsychosis, this reincarnation, if you like, rebirth? Well, the soul is being reborn. Now, why does Plato say that? Is this a story that is a shadow itself of truth? Well, it would make sense to conclude this given the story of the cave. Why does Plato then come up with this story? Well, the story makes sense insofar as it does two things at once. It reinforces our sense of indebtedness, our piety, to the past. So it does not invite us to be future-oriented, right? Because it tells us, look, you're dying. You're leaving this world, and then you're going back, right? And then, when you say, well, you come back, this coming back is tied to the past. The future is necessarily tied to the past. There is no leaping forward into a future cut off from the past. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, upon exiting from its body, the soul faces divine transcendence. So that what we have here is a sense that all of our knowledge presupposes, purported knowledge probably, acquired knowledge, presupposes a knowledge that is pre-empirical. In the story, you can't help saying, well, it's even that is empirical. He had the experience, but again, it's a story, and we have to understand that the psyche, the spirit, the mind, is a kind of mind in a story, as it were, that can be embodied, right? Is not in time. So when it faces the realm of things themselves, it enters in communion with, mind in its absolutely indeterminate state, which, again, you could call God. The story of the transmigration in Plato serves then two functions. One, reinforces piety. Two, exposes us to the limits of piety. Right? Because while it is the case that the future is tied to the past, it is also, most importantly, the case that we are tied to divine transcendence, which transcends, obviously, the cycle of rebirth. So, what is the point of the story? It is a philosophical story by a philosopher, and it shows us that philosophy, or the return to things themselves, is compatible with piety. It does not hurt it. It does not go against it. It does not go against the laws. How so? The laws are possible because of that which philosophy is ultimately about. So we should understand the realm of morality in light of divine transcendence and of our essential tie to divine transcendence. The realm of morality is understood now in terms of purgation. Purgation that is conducive to our full recognition of our indebtedness to divine transcendence, our rootedness in heaven. Let us recall Plato's image of the human being as a tree with roots in the heavens. So he is not a man, as in the vulgar sense, which is to say, a being that is born of the earth, the humus, right? in Latin. The story is therefore a fine story for educators and for all of our youth. However, there can be misunderstandings, misreadings of the story, and this is where Christianity comes to the rescue, to our aid. For Christianity is quite sharp about divine transcendence. We are not bound to the past. This is a message integral to the Gospels. Does Christianity abolish piety? No. It simply reads and exposes the realm of moral attachments, so even family ties, to a divine mandate. We are called to come out of this world now, today, not tomorrow, not after eons of spiritual improvement. That ain't going to happen. What's going to happen is that we will keep dreaming, and one dream will follow another. Let us go back to Buddhism for a moment. What does Buddha teach? He teaches that you can go as far up as you want. It doesn't matter. You're still tied to the hierarchy of incarnations, which is to say of delusion. You can be as perfected as you want. You'll still be determined. And the whole point of the Buddha's path is absolute indetermination, which of course does not mean do whatever you feel like doing. You decide. This is the modern farce replica of the classical discourse of absolute indetermination. You say, well, I'm not tied to nature, to God. I do whatever I want. I am absolutely indeterminate. I am free, completely free. Really. But the problem is that this I that says that he's free is a Cartesian invention, an abstraction, a symbol, a mathematical-like symbol, right? So where is it? Well, it's nowhere, it's everywhere. Well, that would be God, and yet it's there, it's here, it's speaking. It's limited in his understanding, it's acquiring, just as Descartes' self acquires. What does he acquire? Or it acquires? The world that fills it. And so it digests the world and rehashes it, right? Transforms the world of nature, right? Reconstructing it in a scientific manner, on a scientific plane, right? So this is what the modern self does. It takes in the world as an abstraction, as a formal entity, and then fulfills, realizes itself as the modern discourse has it. Self-realization. How do I realize myself? By incorporating the outside, res extensa, the stuff outside, and empowering myself through the construction of a new society, of a wonderful city, of a utopia, call it what you like, a technological world that is not simply brutal, brutish, brute nature, raw nature, but is something that has been converted through the agency of the Cartesian self. No such thing in classical discourse. Buddha says, the classical Buddhists say, well, the self is not that. No, it is certainly not a symbol, not a formal entity. No. If you really want to find out what you are, then you must discard all determinations. And then the question is one of awakening. So there is a return to mind, pure thought. And that is something that is given to us. We don't acquire it. It is given to us in the beginning. So, the Buddhist discourse is similar to the Christian discourse. Does Buddha reject piety? No, of course not. But it reads the gods, Buddha, mind, the whole tradition of Buddha, reads the gods of pre-Buddhist traditions as images of mind. In the Christian tradition, we have a similar mode of discourse. There is the true God, and then there's the false gods that are sort of pagan images, manners of speech, right, of the true God. The true God is absolutely transcendent, not tied to karma, to samsara. There is nirvana. Now, nirvana, of course, in the modern case, is smoke a joint, take LSD, soma. No, and no. Nirvana is the blowing out of all determinations. So, nirvana is disclosure of absolute transcendence. And you could say that absolute transcendence is at once absolutely immanent in the respect that immanence is but a shadow of an original. That determinations are determinations of, therefore everything that is finite is a determination of absolute indetermination of mind. So, bottom line here, do we have reincarnation in classical discourse? Well, not really. We have samsara, lunque, we have rebirth, metempsychosis, we have, this thing, the experience of life, the ordinary experience of life, and then we have a path that cuts through it to awaken us, to call us out. Right? We're called out of this world. And the Jesus of the Gospels is the first to remind us. He calls us out of this world. He doesn't say, just keep going, just stick inside, stick to it, You'll improve, get richer, get more powerful, realize yourself. There's no self-realization process. In Plato, for the Buddhist, for Christianity. And as far as pre-Buddhist Sanskrit traditions go, well, properly understood, they are Buddhism. In other words, the Buddhists will say, look, this is what the pre-Buddhist is all about, the tradition. So what is the truth about it? And Buddha exposes the truth. Right? Samsara is a notion that can be manipulated, used by the powers that be, the guardians of illusions, who are always eager to reinforce the caste system, right? And say, well, look, you are the way you are there determined because of previous actions, right? So there's nothing to object to. There's nothing to complain about. Keep carrying your cross. It makes no sense. The cross now makes no sense. It doesn't mean anything because there's no resurrection. There is no divine intervention that cuts through the web of indebtedness and exposes it as a lie. Right? Does that mean that morality is a lie? No. It means that it is not binding the way conformists would have us believe. It is a mirror of divine transcendence. So I do not listen to my father because of blood ties, because I am indebted physically, temporally to my father. I listen to him because he is a vehicle for the recognition of a divine voice. His word is an image of God's word speaking at the bottom of my soul.